good news out of this is that we should see a decentralization of food distribution and food processing. Big JBSs of the world and the Tysons and probably Smithfields. Farmers are going to start going more to regional production because they're going to get higher prices for their animals than they will from the big houses who are going to try to play the game of buy cheap. But it's going to be a transition.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I have with me Bob Kudla, TradeGeniusAcademy.com. We want to talk about the cascading effects of Southern Hemisphere producers such as Brazil, South Africa, Australia, that are now ceasing their exports or reducing their exports. Now, what type of onward effect would this have as China's still in the massive flood stage, even worse than last year? And they're going to be on the world market looking for an enormous amount of soy, corn, and wheat. Now, the American wheat crop is down 70. That's right, 70, not 17, 70%. So when China's out looking for the swing producer that would usually provide them with the extra, Argentina's offline, Brazil's offline, not going to be able to export United States. So we get into this cascade. And these are the major producers. But when we swing down to South Africa, for an example, they're major exporters to other countries like Botswana, Namibia, and Mauritius. So you need to then ask Inter-Africa, where does it go from here? Because I personally feel this is the year that it rolls over. This is the year that the world understands the grand solar minimum, the food reduction. And here's the thing, if it stays at this level, we're going to be at the break even or maybe a little less for this year. We still have carryover stocks globally, but those will be eaten into. And then ask yourself the question, how many years can we eat into the carryover stocks before what we grow is what we get on the globe? And that's what we wanted to talk about today. So, Bob, I'm really happy you're joining me because I wanted to get some of your expertise. So how do you feel things are intertwining around the planet in terms of shortages?
So from a macro standpoint, we have right now, the monthly global surface temperature anomaly is that we're trending colder than the last 5 years. You know, one of the things that people don't realize when they look at global warming and global cooling is that they just look at the land and they forget the ocean moderate and delay onsets of the primary trend. And now that we've had, I think we're going into the third year of a La Nina event in the Pacific. Also, people don't realize it because they don't name it this, but there's actually a La Nina kind of event happening in the Atlantic right now, i.e. you have cooling in spots that usually when they warm, cause the temperature on the lands to rise over time. They're now both synchronized to cold. And these are long duration kind of events. And so now that you have this situation happening is that you can see how the United States looks this year is kind of how it looks if you get back to the 15th and 16th century with the modern minimum with more intensity. So you're going to see the Pacific Northwest be warmer than normal and drier than normal. You're going to see the South wetter and cooler than normal. You're going to see the Northeast cooler than normal. And you're going to see basically the upper Midwest, when I'm talking about the Dakotas North, as colder and drier. And it's going to cause, obviously, the effects that you and I have been talking about for the last 10 years. And in fact, they're already happening. So you and I no longer have to say this is coming. It's here already. It's happening. We're seeing it already in the pricing. The prices aren't going up because of Biden administration monetary policy. Pricing's going up because there's not as much food as there are people who want to buy it or need to buy it. And so you're starting to get these spot shortages. And here's one that's really interesting. The oat crop is down 14% for the year.
That's a canary in the coal mine. Oats are incredibly sensitive to climate change in terms of precipitation or temperature in their growth maximum optimum.
Yeah, and so NASA is actually reporting, believe it or not, reporting data that's opposite of what the global warming people want you to believe. These trends are going to intensify. So you have basically the Pacific Northwest wheat crop. It may revert back to prairie up there unless they start intensive irrigation. Their winter wheat is not going to produce, the spring wheat, whatever they call it, because they may not get the rains that they expect. It's going to be really interesting to see how these things change. Look how dry Nebraska has been this year. The only reason why the corn is doing well there is because of heavy irrigation. And the Dakotas and Minnesota have been dry. The Northeast is going to freeze early this year. We see it. You look over in Germany, and you and I talked about, like, you had an incredible interview that you did. I forget with whom. Maybe it was just one of your own podcasts. It must have been 4 or 5 years ago, where you showed the river valleys in Europe that are going to suffer immense flooding. And we're starting to see those river valleys now start taking those hits. And so you're going to start seeing, why are these river valleys now? Because that's where the low pressure systems are going to start to form. So, Northeast US, Western Europe, they're mirrors of each other. And then Northwest Pacific, Northeast Asia are mirrors of each other. You just watch to see what's happening, hot and dry in Japan. Then areas that we knew nothing about really in the 15th and 16th century is Central and South America, and they weren't keeping temperature records till probably maybe the mid 1600s. And they weren't in the growing regions of Brazil. Those people were, along the coast primarily. Is that you have this weather anomalies that are the 600 years that people have lived in Brazil. It hasn't snowed where people are getting snow now.
Bob, can you stop for a second? That was a blizzard. If you watch the footage from that, the wind was blowing at 50 miles an hour, bringing that, half a foot of snow in there at blizzard conditions. And then they never get snow there, and they had a blizzard. So it's so far off the hook of even that having a blizzard in a tropical area, something's very amiss.
The reason why it's important for your listeners to understand is that Argentina is now providing corn to Brazil. So they're going offline as an export engine for the world. At the same time, China is ramping up their imports because they are falling short of their agricultural production as well. And now we have the situation where with this COVID, we don't have enough ships or the ports aren't open. And China's locking down again, Dave. They're locking down. And what people don't realize, I'll shift gears just a second, but the people don't realize that Yangtze Valley is where the city that Apple has all their production out of is downstream of those dams. Hubei province is where all our pharmaceuticals come from. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger deal. I think 2021 is the year of, why is this costing me too much? 2022 might be the year of, I wish I would have bought a couple bags of rice and started my garden kind of a year. I'm walking around grocery stores now, and I live in areas of plenty, and the grocery store shelves are never full. I went into Costco, and even there, they were out of water, and they were out of certain cuts of beef. So, I asked the question, I'm like, hey, you guys, how do you guys get this? Hey, stuff comes in when it comes in. So the supply chains are breaking down. So what that's going to lead to is higher and higher costs. The good news out of this is that we should see a decentralization of food distribution and food processing. Big JBSs of the world and the Tysons and probably Smithfields. Farmers are going to start going more to regional production because they're going to get higher prices for their animals than they will from the big houses who are going to try to play the game of buy cheap. But this is going to be a transition. I know the farmers that I follow are all ramping up herds of beef where areas that they don't normally grow them because the prices are so lucrative now. The bad news is they're not selling their corn and wheat anymore. They're holding on to their grain production to feed their own animals. So it's going to be a really interesting environment going forward.
And the Costco over here, I was in the other day, they're out of paper plates, paper cups, that sort of, one-time usage thing, completely bare, not a one in the store anywhere. I did quite a bit of study on China because I lived there and I knew a few of the areas, traveled through a bit. And some of the people that have left there, but were working online with companies there, the gates have suddenly shut in China. One guy, he was a manager, ran like a regional area of an online teaching school. And China doesn't want anybody outside the Chinese system talking into their citizens. So the entire online teaching and online vocation and online training sector of that entire country, which is $1 billion industry, completely firewalled off now. They're giving inside China free education to the children via the state-sponsored online training programs. No foreigners allowed, no foreign investment, no foreign intervention, nothing, complete firewall within a month. So that whole thing, an entire industry gone there. So it does seem that China is pulling up the gates. And the floods this year are worse than last year, because last year it was in the upper Yangtze. And, you got to divide the areas into two areas. So the upper Yangtze is right at the edge where that Three Gorges Dam is, going back toward Chongqing and further up into the, base of the Himalayas where that comes out there. Flood in that entire floodplain and river valley system all the way to the Three Gorges Dam. But then they had the Three Gorges Dam full open. And then it trickled down to those other dams, and they were able to slough off a bunch of the water before it hit the areas that it is now. But this year, the floods are directly over the crop growing zone. And when they sloughed off the water, they sloughed it off into the crop growing zone in the heartland of the heartland. I mean, the floods this year are so much more devastating than last in terms of showing the fragility of our most modern infrastructure, on how that tunnel was flooded so fast and all those cars were trapped down there. So covered, so inundated, all encompassing. Everywhere you look, systems are breaking down, infrastructure is breaking down, and our way of life is being reset at the same time in conjunction with all of these things that we're seeing. I would just call it an amplification of everything moving forward. But South Africa is the canary in the coal mine, I do believe. So is the oats. The oats in South Africa, if you don't see that, are two major factors going, whoa, something has drastically changed. Maybe you need a bigger microscope.
Well, there's reports out of India that the Chinese rainfall totals are in the 1,000-year range.
Yeah, of course, that would be expected. Fully expected.
Right. This is hitting the some of the phases and cycles that we've been talking about. When you have those La Niñas happening in the Eastern Pacific, all that heat is now bottled up in the South China Sea and in the Indian Ocean. And so China's just going to get hit with wave after wave after wave of super typhoons. And northern China is getting hit right now. Normally, they both don't get hit at the same time, but they are.
Yeah, and then switching over to Europe, you saw the 1.5 foot of snow already hitting up into the Alps there. Zermatt, Saas-Fee, Passo Solevo in Italy, already receiving at least 1.1 feet, and they're predicting even more snow for the next 48 hours. And ski resorts are super excited because they know they're going to be opening early this year. You were pinpointing some of those areas in Europe with mega floods. I was looking at a history book, because those same areas were the same areas that had flooded during the Maunder minimum and the Sporer minimum, both. They did it twice already previously in major grand solar minimums. I'm wondering 3 times would be a third time as a charm. So all I looked for, the highest flood mark in Germany, and it pegged right in those same exact towns in the northwest of Germany, the same exact areas that flooded in the same exact time frame of those major floods down in southern France and Italy, in that basin area there, Torino, etc., going west over into parts of France. It's not woo-woo magic. It's looking into a history book and seeing the repeating cycles and knowing the cycles are repeating, so you can start to pick out some of the same events in terms of floods. And you look and say, well, what kind of infrastructure, agricultural grow zones, manufacturing might be in these same areas? And you go, well, that's going to start to get hit. Now, what's the knock-on effect?
So, we're hitting a lot of cycles here. We're hitting the weather cycles. We're hitting the winter cycle of the economics. Politics is breaking down. And we have an environment where, I call it peak centralization. You're going to see a breakdown of ability of what I would call the federalized government to really help their people. And it's going to break down. It's going to get more and more local, which we talked about. That ironically, these things should happen. You should have shorter supply lines, and you should have better interconnection so that one big failure. I'm not going to pick on Taiwan because I want them to be successful, but all the chip manufacturers in the world are relying on Taiwanese fabricators for all our electronics and all of our car chips. And now it's affecting worldwide production of automobiles and electronics. All of our pharmaceutical precursors, we've outsourced to China. And that river, the Yangtze River, it's flooding right now. And if they flood to a point where people can't get to work and they decide to lock down again, well, it puts the pharmaceutical at risk for the entire world. Thomas Friedman said the world is flat. Well, the world is getting bumpy again. And that alone will raise costs. You know, China and American Federal Reserve policy has caused a deflation that people don't see because you say, but Bob, prices have gone up every year. Correct. However, if China didn't exist and the Federal Reserve buying assets didn't exist and buying down interest rates, we've already would have hyperinflated. And now those two are running at the end of their ability to continue that trend. So we're already going to see higher prices. So when you have higher prices and where China can't compete on price, you're going to start seeing manufacturing and production move back closer to the source of the consumer. So you're going to see production moving back into the United States. The problem is we're going to have pain getting from A to B because when A shuts down, B may not be ready again. And that's going to happen with food production. That's going to happen with other economic inputs. And, you know, right now, I have a neighbor across the street who's been waiting weeks, months, I think, even to get windows in. He can't finish his remodel on his home. His house is open to the elements until these windows come in. For my birthday in June, I wanted a great green egg, you know, one of those smokers. And I had to buy the floor model because the guy said, if you want a green egg this year, you better buy what's on my floor. And he showed me his order book. And people have been ordering since March, waiting for their green egg to come in. And that is a U.S. produced product. You just can't get the transportation. And you pick and choose. You're lucky because you don't have slabs where you live. But out here in California, we have slab homes, no basements. And sometimes with earth movement and with the poor construction quality in a lot of these homes that were built in the 80s and early 90s, you have basically what's called slab leaks, where the copper pipe coming into the house from underneath leaks. You can't get the replacement parts, what they're called PEX, plastic, because of what happened in Texas with the winter freezes. It pushed them way behind in production. So one thing after the other, and these things all snowball with each other. You know, you're running into situations where an inconvenience here, an inconvenience there starts becoming more, I'm going to start hoarding now and things of that nature.
Yeah, because PEX is a good one because that's a freeze thaw type of plastic piping that can expand it even if it freezes. You know, we use that in Tennessee here. Everybody's got PEX or is on the PEX bandwagon because the winters are getting cooler here. And in Mississippi as well, a lot of pipes broke down there last year. So Mississippi as well, there's a huge amount of people with miles and miles, tens of miles of PEX pipe order in that can't get filled. And out here, I'll tell you a personal story. I am trying to gravel my driveway, and I have a 1,000-foot gravel driveway. I need to get graveled in. I can't get the guys to come out because they're running so much. They're hauling so much to all these construction sites all over the place. That even getting a hauler to come in and drop a 20-ton of rock. All right, I'll just come in and drop it. I'll get a guy with a loader and come and spread it myself. But, geez, everything. I don't care if it's just simple as basic rock dropped onto your property at the moment is difficult. There's not enough people working. Everywhere you look, there's a supply chain breakdown. Now there's airplane fuel shortages, and they're blaming staff shortages. So I just don't know when it's going to stop. I think we are in the amplification decline phase at the moment. Myself, where at this point, everything's amplifying in the decline, not the solutions. But for me, a solution is getting the parts, components, pieces, and frames or whatever it is for indoor vertical agriculture on your own home. Because your garage, you can turn into a massive grow zone. But bringing it on to the community-based level or the city-based level where, you start to bring in a lot of supplies to revert over to indoor growing as the outdoor mediums are becoming less and less hospitable for whatever plants that you're trying to grow. I mean, wherever there's a decline, there's also an opportunity to take up because, nothing's going to go to zero. And please understand, nothing's going to go to zero. Never has, never will. It's going to rearrange and move. So that's the greatest opportunity in our, lifetimes is figuring out where this transition is going to be, which companies, which industries, what's the biggest human need in the change. So we're going to go from what we understand a stable society, and it's going to shift and rift and shake and bake and crack. But then what do we need the most, and what companies can offer that service during the transition to keep our way of life, our style of life, our comfort of life, continuing at some semblance of normal moving forward. And that's where the value is going to be in those companies.
Yeah. And for me, obviously I look at it from a trader's perspective, and we went back into Mosaic this week. You could buy IPI, and they just had earnings. They're just 18% surprise to the upside on their earnings estimates. And just for the listeners, not so much for you, but when you need to supercharge a crop to get it to the flowering or the fruiting stage or the heading stage, you got to give it potash. Or if you're worried that your growing season is going to shorten up, you're going to go do it. Or if your land flooded out, you're going to need to put on a topical fertilizer to, re-energize the ground. And so these are stocks. You should have it as a core to your product. And I'm just looking at the charts here while we're talking. Is another one that you probably want to get your hands on over time is a company called the Anderson Company. They have grain silos, and they handle transportation, and they also pay a dividend. So that's another stock that you should put into your portfolio to own. So we're watching. We have an algo that just tells us when money's moving into things. Alibaba caught our attention this morning. I'm watching it. It has to get over a certain price, and then it's going to make a $10 to $15 move. We show people how you can trade that with options. There's always an opportunity out there, regardless of what happens in the market. If this market goes down, we're buying volatility. We'll show people how to trade that too. So there's opportunities all the time in the market until they shut the market down, right? So there's always going to be a bull market somewhere.
Always. And I'll leave that link in the description box below. You can reach out. Again, thanks for listening to what we have to say.
Thank you.